Thank you, Daniel. Thank you, dear organizers, CSU Brussels and Mrs. Hohlmeier. Thank you very much. I have to admit, I was a little bit scared this morning to be the only social democrat in this honor room. But happily enough, I'm not the only one. But I have to admit that my friends in Munich always say now you found the right path, finally. So I'm representing the European Citizens Initiative Stop Extremism. And for a long time, we are dealing with the topics we discuss here today. Because the financing extremistic structures from abroad, here in Europe, is an important issue for all of us here in the European Union. Before going into detail, I just would like to give you a brief overview of our European Citizen Initiative, Stop Extremism. So we are an ECI that demands that legal measures have to be taken at the EU level to effectively combat all forms of extremism in Europe. And this means, in the consequence, Islamistic terrorism and its funders. This means hate speech in radical mosques and on social networks. This means also right-wing extremism and anti-Semitism. And it also, of course, means leftist rioting. We all here in Europe cannot stand idly while these groups and their supporters hold Europe and the European Union hostage and try to tear our societies apart. The two initiators of the initiative, one is sitting here, Dr. Sebastian Reimer, an Austrian legal expert who is the author of our directive which we send to the European Commission. And on the other hand, the German lawyer and founder of the first liberal mosque in Germany, in Berlin, Mrs. Seran Atesh. She unfortunately cannot be here today. So when we are talking about extremism, there is no shared definition for us, what extremism is, especially across the European Union. In our view, there are no effective instruments to prevent extremism and extremists from receiving funding from outside of the EU. There are also no efficient means of protecting, for example, employees here in the European Union who are confronted with extremism at work. Lawmakers and individual member states are, in our view, overwhelmed by the complexity of the social media channels and where extremists try to exploit their views. In general, I would say that we have to acknowledge the fact that the extremistic threat does not come alone from bearded fundamentalists sitting somewhere in the desert and indoctrinating mostly young people here in Europe. No, not new, but still non-recognized strategy by Islamist extremists is to fight our system, its values and core rules from within the system, from within the institutions we are controlling. And this is probably the most, in my view, the most dangerous threat to our society. No, not those bearded, strange-looking IS fighters. No, these are the people who are coming here to the European Union, to its institutions, with a suit, perfect English, well educated in Oxford, and try to dig into our system from within. Let me give as one example Qatar. Qatar is one of, we must not underestimate this influence of Qatar and the Muslim Brotherhood here in Europe. This small but rich country is not the only one to be classified as an authoritarian regime in the democracy index by the well-known British newspaper, The Economist. But it has spent the past several years expanding its financial international engagement abroad, particularly in popular sports such as football, and also in European key banks as well. So just give me some examples. The 2022 FIFA World Cup in Qatar, sponsorship of the well-known Paris football club Paris Saint-Germain, and also, don't be surprised, the chair of the Deutsche Bank Supervisory Board's Integrity Committee is led by Qatar, by a representative who openly says that he supports the Muslim Brotherhood. Amnesty International, for example, justifiably pointed to the precarious state of human rights violations in relation to the preparation of the Football World Cup. So what does this mean, this financing I'm talking about? You can see some examples on the maps you found on your chairs. These are not financial structures to any weird, bearded fundamentalists. No. These are fundings, for example, just 15 million euros to the Oxford University to bring a Qatari so-called professor, Tariq Ramadan, onto the chair of this prestigious university teaching Islamic science, preaching at the same time at the university the ideology of the Muslim Brotherhood, conservative Islam. As you probably know, he is now arrested in France for raping some women. This only one example. I can go forward. If you need any more detailed information about these numbers, please let me know. So they finance mosques. They finance so-called educational centers, schools. What is the consequence, in my view? Rising anti-Semitism, the call for the Sharia. And this is not, we always say that those refugees who are entering Europe since 2014-15 are calling for the Sharia here in Europe. There was just recently a survey in Germany comparing the views of young Muslims who are living in Europe in the second, third generation compared to the position of the refugees who just entered. What came out? The Muslims who are living in Europe in the second and third generation supported Sharia law in Western Europe up to 72%, while the refugees who just came from Syria only supported Sharia law here in Europe in the amount of 15%. Even anti-Semitism from Muslims living here in the second, third generation, up to 65% openly say that they hate Jews, while refugees at the same time, there were only 10 to 11% who said that. So this is not a problem only of the refugees. We have to ask ourselves what went wrong even longer before. Beside the anti-Semitism, a backwards trend regarding women's inequality. They teach this in schools in Austria, in Germany. When I'm talking with MPs from the local level, why don't you close those schools? They say, they don't do anything criminal. When they teach that even 8-year-old girls have to wear the hijab, this is not our problem. This is our problem, because this became already our problem. Coming back to the Muslim Brotherhood, we might always say, and also policymakers, governments say, well, we have to deal with the Muslim Brotherhood because they are a kind of liberal, traditional but liberal and probably one of the most powerful Islam political parties, and we have to deal with them. Let me give you some quotes of the recently written Muslim Brotherhood ideology paper, how they teach their members what to do. To accept, I quote, to accept the principle of temporary cooperation between Islamic movements and nationalist movements in the broad sphere and on common grounds such as the struggle against colonialism, preaching and fighting against the Jewish state, without, however, having to form alliances. This will require, on the other hand, limited contacts between certain leaders on a case-by-case basis, as long as these contacts do not violate the Sharia law. Nevertheless, one must not give them allegiance or take them into confidence, bearing in mind that the Islamic movement must be the origin of the initiatives and the orientations taken worldwide. To use diverse and varied surveillance systems worldwide in several places to gather information and adopt a single effective warning system serving the worldwide Islamic movement. In fact, surveillance, policy decisions, and effective communications complement each other. Also, to study the centers of power in the West, both local and worldwide, and the possibilities of placing them under influence. It sounds scary to me. And at the same time, many governments of the European Union say that the Muslim Brotherhood is an organization we have to cooperate with. I doubt that. So what does this mean? The European Union has the duty, not only for political and governmental means, but also regarding the protection of our values. And when I'm talking about our values, I'm talking about the the Charter of Fundamental Rights. We have to challenge those threats. Administrations in the European Union must not finance fundamentalists. Europe has to start also support liberal Islamic movements. Let me give here an example from Germany. The German government, for decades now, in the so-called Islam conference, was supporting and talking only to the, let's say, Erdogan-controlled DTIP, while other liberal groups, for example, the mosque of our co-founder Seran Atesh, is not heard at all. We have to know that about 65% of the Muslims living in Germany are not religiously minded. Who is a Muslim? So it's not like in Christianity that we are baptized. In our passport, in some countries it is said we are Christians. No, when you're born Muslims, you are Muslim. And you never will leave this community, even if you never visited a mosque. So the majority is not religiously minded, but our governments only deal with conservative and to some extent I would say with fundamentalist Islamic organizations in Western Europe, while the liberal part is forgotten. And I would ask the European governments and the national governments to stop this. So, in fighting extremism, in our viewpoint of the initiative, what does this mean? Firstly, we avoid negative economic effects in the European Union by fighting the extremism. We can improve the functioning of our common market in the European Union in the future, and we legally sound regulation for an effective safeguarding of fundamental rights with particular emphasis on strengthening the European Union and discouraging other countries from withdrawing from the Union. What are our measures we proposed? We have identified the following measures in our proposed anti-extremism directive towards achieving our stated aims. A clear definition of extremism based on the EU Charter of Fundamental Rights. A European watch list so extremists do not go unrecognized. Transparency with respect to combating foreign financing of extremists. An extremism-free certification to support companies, schools, and other organizations in remaining free of extremism. And lastly, easier filing of compensation claims, especially with the respect to protecting women and children. So I can tell you today that we already collected 1.6 million signatures Europe-wide. We still have time until mid-June until we send those signatures to the European Commission. And then hopefully we can be successful when the European Commission will support our proposals for a directive, but we still need your support. We still need your support from the European Parliament, and we need support from the NGOs. So, thank you very much.